All right, we're back to a normal week. What's going on? Hopefully everyone's Monday is off to a good start. Have one more week in February, and then we are on to the third trading month of the year. 2019 has been good. At least the action's picked up, even if on Sunday we were in for quite a dump. I do still think there's going to be tons of opportunity this week, guys. This kind of movement for Bitcoin, call it manipulated, call it whatever you want, is a lot more attractive, and it's driving a lot more volatility than periods of time like back here, or even in really most of January, where we would trade inside of kind of a 1% range, just dribbling down lower and lower. So ever since February kicked off, it's been good. Obviously, there's always things that I can do better, that you could probably do better, but for the most part, this is going to continue to make the trading week full of action. So a lot to cover today. Bitcoin bouncing on that 3,700 support that I wanted to highlight over the weekend that I liked as a buy. We'll talk about whether the map is any different from Bitcoin compared to last week, right? As we first moved above this key resistance, 3,700, right? Aiming for 41, we get it. Then we drop off, right? Whether the map is any different from last week when we first moved above 3,700, right? When we had the breakout, I had a few different levels picked out, mid-range level of 3,800 or 3,880 or 3,900, right? That was kind of the first resistance, turn support for the move up. I want to talk about whether or not there's any other levels that I'm thinking about that you should be thinking about in terms of, I still think 41 or 4,200 is probably going to be the more optimal, the more optimistic resistance and swing highs that price could reach to, but then still considering this mid-range level. So we'll look at Bitcoin a little bit closer after this bounce. We'll also want to look at, I think the scene has changed slightly for alts, right? If you remember last week and most of February, above our first level was above 3430. I thought alts were interesting. Above 3630, they got pretty interesting. And above 3700 last week was kind of short-term very bullish for alts and short-term very bullish for Bitcoin. Now, as we still do stay above 3700, is that any different for alts? Does ADA and ETH and other things still have upside, right? Is there a chance that ETH can still reach kind of this final target of 0.041? Different things like that. And then also as it relates to the Binance plays, which once again, I know a couple of people want me to look at MFT. I do think this is interesting. I think a lot of the cycle low alts are still very interesting. But I think once again, I'll kind of talk about why I'm kind of going to put those a little bit on the back burner again and try to focus a lot more on ADA, ETH, Ripple now today, because I just think when there's this big of swings with Bitcoin and we haven't seen kind of a fully or completed cycle of Bitcoin moving up, then major alts moving up, and then kind of that stopping and allowing mid caps to move up. I just still think that the vast majority of the focus, the vast majority of the moves, and the vast majority of the trading opportunities are going to be on Bitcoin and on majors. I'll talk about why I don't think that mid caps are set to do terribly, right? I think it's fine to still have exposure in some. I'm still in a few of my trades, right? But I just think that maybe we delayed whether or not they can really perform well for right now, right? So I'll talk about all that big picture kind of strategy stuff. The one big takeaway before I jump into everything and shout out who's in here is my favorite thing to see today, starting the week, and now after it's been probably 2 months of really hitting hard kind of on the framework that I know some people are maybe annoyed of, but it's simply what's working right now, and it's what I'm going to continue to focus on. When the market changes, I'll have a new framework, but the framework that I've probably focused on the most in terms of alts is cycle lows. And regardless of whether you've played a quant stamp trade that hit target, or if you caught the Loom trade, which I know some people were still in, hitting that first target, whether you caught the plays from last week with ELF or whatever it might be, RCN, right? Regardless of whether one of the plays has worked out, one of the comments that I saw that was just so cool for me to see was that even if one of your swings hasn't worked out in the mid-cap space or the Binance altcoin space, that when Bitcoin drops or when we do have a bearish day or when everything's falling, being positioned into those places has really limited your downside. And I think some people have noticed that. Someone even made a comment about kind of the impact that would have had over the past 6 months, which is just awesome for me to see, guys. I think that's just so much more important over the long term is having a framework or is having an approach that's going to limit the downside when things go bad, because it is crypto, right? And if you can do that, that's kind of my biggest focus each week, getting the big things right, limiting downside. There will be periods or small windows of time where kind of the money almost seems easy, right? And then it's, 80 or 75% of the other time is just, how do I not give it all back to the market, or how do I not lose 5 or 10% a week? Right, so I love seeing that. We're going to touch a little bit on that, but let's get into Bitcoin first. Should have a good stream, guys. It's going to be a fun week. Shout out to everyone that's in here. Valerio, it's been a while. Welcome back, man. Rosier, what's going on? Mark, Jeremiah, Gregor, Marius, Andy, Sky Jones, Maxime, Michael, welcome. I will hit your question on leverage. I think that's a good one to talk about. Sky Jones, we can look at MFT like I mentioned. If anyone else has any questions with coins, please do give me some context, like Sky Jones did. It helps me a ton. Whether or not you're looking for an entry, whether you're looking for an exit, whether you have a position, things like that. I can kind of tailor my thoughts once I understand what you're actually trying to do, right? As opposed to just looking at a blank chart. So let's get into it. Also, welcome if you are new. What's up, Ryan? Goodspeed. I know we have like 3 or 4 new members coming in, and I imagine there's going to be a few more once I can work through emails. It's been a sweet 2019, guys. If you're new and anything I'm saying is kind of out there, you don't fully grasp it, after a day or two in the stream, I'm sure, I'm kind of confident you will. So tell me to slow down if I talk fast. I know I talk fast. If there's something I move really fast through, it's probably because it's posted in the Discord. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to take a sip of my water, and then we'll be good to go. All right. So... Bitcoin, I'm not going to go through too much of kind of a historical. Sometimes I like to maybe take a couple steps back and see how things have been trading for the past few days to kind of set up the narrative or the bias or whatever it is, my view on how things are going to continue to move. Really, all I want to cover is the last couple of days in the weekend, right? So Sunday, obviously we have the massive drop. I guess from last stream is probably the only thing I'm going to touch on from Saturday's stream, right? If I think about my plan for Bitcoin, one of the things that's such an important concept that I try to focus on every single week, and I think gets highlighted nearly every single day in crypto, is using daily closes as a nice indication or as a nice confirmation point, right? So one of the things we looked at in terms of 4120 and stopping at 4120 on Friday, Saturday was if price could close above, right, daily close above 4120, right, like this example back here in November, yes, I saw more upside to 4400. If we just have wicks and no close above, right, you can see it happened back here in December. We have another time, the last push up to 4120, right? If we just wick there and close below that level, 4120 happened in January as well, which is what we got on Saturday, right? Generally, that's not going to want to make me buy right at resistance, right? We have wicks through, closes below, meaning that resistance is respected. Now, if we on the flip side, right, in an alternative universe, if we close above anywhere up here, sure, probably expecting more upside. But since we didn't close above, right, I was looking for a pullback to 3880. I thought that's where we'd pull back to. Didn't expect us to pull all the way back to 3,700, but that's what we did, right? So my game plan on Sunday, and still my game plan as of today, and we can kind of see how it's working, is 3,700, which was such an important resistance, right? After we drop in 4K, this is not only the yearly open, but it's also the level that we were pinned under ever since that last drop. Right, so crossing above it was massive. So that's just been kind of the most important pullback, or the ideal pullback, or a level that I didn't think we were going to pull back to, but we did, right? So when we get that chance, sure, I am scared, and I definitely think there's a chance that we still break through it and move lower, right? I thought there was a chance that we were going to cruise right through it yesterday, but we didn't, and I just kind of wanted to stick to the plan of that being an attractive pullback, right? It's the most important daily level that we broke out of, and that's what led to the impulse move. So for me, that was just kind of a clear resistance support flip. So I liked the buys anywhere in the 3,700s. That's doing all right today, up 2, 3, 4%. Two levels that I'm looking for price to move to. And I'm not as deep into some of the order flow and price action techniques that some guys in the group are really talented with. Voidbox, Tommy, and a couple of those guys are probably your go-to. There's also some really good guys on Twitter that cover it as well. I don't focus as much on that stuff, but I know there are people interested in a level before even my 3880 level. Some people call that a breaker. If you have questions about that, I'm sure I saw Void talking about it a fair amount in the BitMEX chat. So he's kind of your guy there. That's not really a technique that I focus on. but they're phenomenal with using those. So that's something to think about. How I'm looking at this, let me close out Telegram before I get a million notifications here. How I'm looking at this is the same levels that were important last week, right? To me are the exact same. We have this mid-range pivot, right? You can think about this level a few different ways. I think zooming out and looking at this range we've traded in from 3,600 up to 4,100, it's the mid-range level, right? So you can either, it's a fib level, you can either draw a fib and kind of say that's right at 50%. Some people like to literally just kind of dictate a mid-range level. That's something that Trader SZ does. I think he does some really good work with ranges. I've always just kind of thought of it as a fib level and as a nice pivot area. So when price is trading above, this 38.80, same way we used it last week, when price is above it, right, generally I'm going to see it act as support. And there's just so many examples that I'm not going to dive too deep into in the stream. I want to keep it moving. But when we're below it, right, the exact same thing is true to the flip side. I'm going to expect it to be resistance. Right? That's why I'm calling it a pivot area. Right? When we're above it, support. When we're below it, I'm just anticipating resistance there. It's also a level that we used a fair amount last week. Right? So zooming in on 4 hour, I'll show you what I mean. Right? This was kind of our deciding point. This is kind of our deciding point all week. I'm just going to draw 38.80. I know my line's slightly different right now. It's like 3,900. Right? But this whole zone was both support last week. Now I'm looking for that area to be resistance. Right? So we have our bounce from 3,700, right? Where I like those buys, where I like to buy Sunday, kind of gave my idea on why I thought that made sense. One area where I am looking to take partial profits, we're not there yet. I think 38.75, 38.80 is probably maybe front running myself a little bit, but I am a little bit more cautious now on this Bitcoin bounce, right? So I am looking to take some small profits there. It'll be a small trade, a quick trade, really only $100 or $150 trade. But I like taking partial profits there. Obviously, my ideal or optimistic level that I'm targeting is once again the exact same target as last week, right? So one phrase or one thing that I like to say is, you hear a lot, you hear people say trade the trend or trade with the trend, meaning if the trend is up, obviously buying is probably going to be easier, right? If the trend is down, selling and shorting is probably going to be easier. One thing when we're ranging or when we're in a range-bound market, there is no clear trend. I generally want to try to play the range, right? Until the range is broken. So for right now, that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing daily closes inside the range of 4120. That's range high. I kind of think 3630 is the bottom of the range, but right now 3700 is our support. So for right now, while we're range bound, I'm going to play the range, right? That's my optimal target up here at 4120. Again, I'm not sure we get there as quick as we did last week, but still that's kind of big picture where I'm targeting the move to. And then right now, like I just said, I think this is probably the first area that it makes sense for me to take off some of my long buys from down in here. Right? My last fills were even as high as kind of 3750, 3760 yesterday. So that's what I'm looking to. Quick $100, $150 move. I'm fine with 3% a day for Bitcoin. Not so sure. I'm not going to take a short or a hedge yet. One thing to go a little bit deeper for people that are actively trading Bitcoin, you can tune me out if you don't trade on BitMEX too much. But for people that are a little bit more active, I think this might help. One thing that I like to do is to use daily opens as a nice bias. And what I mean by that, right, if we're... the daily open on my chart right now, I'm going to take away one thing. Daily open on my chart right now is these little yellow circles, right? I'm going to kind of delete this really quick. Delete all my drawings so you can see it clearly. These little yellow circles that are kind of shooting out, right? That's going to cover where the daily opens for each day, right? 7 p.m. Eastern time. So that's daily open, right? You have to think when price is above it, it's a green candle. When price is below it, it's a red candle. One thing that I like to do for my intraday trading or smaller time frame Bitcoin stuff is to be trading in the direction of the daily open. What that means is, right, if the daily open is here, right, I'm generally looking for longs, right? Same thing if the daily open was here, right, I'm generally looking for longs who are above it. Exact same thing if the daily open is red, right? Clearly, I didn't take a short, I didn't hedge there, but if, I was sitting at my computer during this dump, I probably would have looked for a hedge or looked for a quick scalp, right? So generally like to be trading in the direction of the daily open. As this relates to the concept I'm talking about right now, if we're thinking about the yearly open, I don't use this as much, but it's something I'm trying to work in. If the yearly open happened around 3,700, right? 3,700 is kind of that level. Thinking about the same way I use the daily open, generally I want to be trading in the direction of the daily open, meaning if it's a green candle, right? this is the green daily right now. If we look at smaller time frames, we can see this is where the daily opens. So you have to think about, how do I want to be positioned into this candle? If knowing it's a green daily, where do I want to be getting at? Obviously, this is as close to the bottom of the green candle as possible, right? Obviously, we're getting closer to the top of the green candle, but generally trading the direction of it. If we think about the yearly candle, right, and the yearly open was back here at 3,700, the same kind of thinking applies just in the back of my head, right? Just because the yearly is green doesn't mean I couldn't be looking for shorts, or just because the, yearly is red doesn't mean I couldn't be looking for longs. But big picture, another thing that kind of supported why I wanted to be buying 3,700s yesterday, and why I'm not too excited to be net short yet, is just because for me, that's kind of a retest of the yearly open that we got, right? So the yearly right now is green. The trend for the past month or two has been up, even if it's only a very short-term trend, right? Or for the month of February. So I kind of still do like being long, but that's me personally, guys. I try to pass along my best objective, view analysis that helps you. So copying me is really never going to help you there. So anyways, this is what I'm aiming for. I'm not looking to get net short yet, but this is where definitely I'm going to be taking some profit on some longs, right? So regardless of whether or not you're trading Bitcoin, I think this is a nice pivot or resistance level to be watching. Obviously, if we get back above 3,900, I think the chances of us hitting 4,100 are quite good. If we get stopped here, right? If this does act as resistance here, I think the chances of us revisiting 3,700 or as low as 3,600s is high, right? So that's how I'm using this level. I want to see how price reacts in the 3,880 to 3,900 range. 4-hour daily closes are going to be the best indicator there. Right, that's the Bitcoin plan. So things changed a little bit, right? Last week, above 3,700 for me, every alt was flying. I think that plan worked out well. Now things are a little bit different, right? Bitcoin dumped. We're back below the pivot, but it's slowly moving up. So I'm going to look at, or kind of give my general thoughts on alts, and then we'll dive into some of the individual setups we've covered, like MFT, Kilgore. I can definitely look at Request. Shu, we can look at Pundi as well. That's what I wanted to hit last time. But big picture, guys, at least my thoughts on how I've wanted to play major alts. I think I've made this one clear, and really it's still my view. I still like being long ADA and ETH. For right now, I guess the biggest, if I had to put it into one simple rule, as long as Bitcoin's above 3,700, I think major alts are going to do all right, right? That was the real trigger for me last week, and I still think it's going to be the trigger. Certainly, they've taken a nice pullback as Bitcoin pulled back, but most of them made a new higher high or are inching back up today as Bitcoin inches up. If we look at ETH, right, my second ad did not work, but if we look at kind of the original trade for going into February and still how I want to play this for the fork, it's still up, what, 5, 6, 7%. I'm still looking for the 20% play. I don't see ETH and ADA and all the other majors that have done so well, EOS, I don't see them doing terribly, right, and really kind of dumping unless Bitcoin breaks this 3,700 support. Right, so if Bitcoin does pull back, if it dumps here and breaks here, then I think all kind of, I wouldn't really want to be long ETH, ADA, or even kind of, whatever you're trading. If you're trading EOS and Litecoin, whatever it is. If Bitcoin breaks 3,700, I think we see another major dump for alts, and I probably have to change my views on liking ETH and ADA. But for right now, I think this pullback, the same way they move up when Bitcoin moves up, right? They took a massive step backwards as Bitcoin dumped down, right? But so far, they're almost all holding their structure of continually kind of forming higher lows. Right? So I still like ADA. I know it's right back to break even, and this has kind of been my highest conviction major play. Obviously, I want to see it do well. I'm financially incentivized for it to do well, but it just hasn't, right? It's still flat. So ETH up slightly still. I'm not too interested in EOS or any of these yet. I still think EOS, Litecoin, and the others are probably the most expensive of the bunch. I think EOS, Litecoin, and those are probably more suited for more pullback before ETH and ADA do. I still think ETH and ADA look quite nice. So that's big picture on those, and then I'll dive into the individual alt plays. So as it relates to other alt plays, I want to try to communicate this the best I can. Sometimes it's a little bit tough for me, but if I think about major alts, I think my plan last week, and was very, very clear for everyone, and this worked out for most of the group December, January, February, right? We had a driver of 34.30. I like large caps. I want to be in large caps first, above 36.30. I like it even more, above 3,700, outright kind of bullish, and then thinking, mid caps will probably start catching on soon, right? Originally, I thought as Bitcoin gets up here, mid and Binance caps and Binance coins are going to do quite well. That's obviously changed as we've dropped, right? So I do like exposure to, these Binance plays that we've discussed, right? The Binance plays that I'm personally trading, I do still like them. I know someone has a question about MFT, right? I could scroll through 20 different Binance charts that we've looked at, right? So the last update we had here on MFT, if you guys remember the original trade back from January, right? The play looked like this: buying cycle lows, aiming for 109 or 40, 50% play, having a stop below these cycle lows. How'd that work out? Right, this is kind of how things worked out. We almost got up to 109 target. I'm a little frustrated it didn't. But as price moved back down, right, we had a rule, and we cover this in quite a few streams, as it kind of gets below 83, 84 sats, probably makes sense to be taking at least partial profit, 10, 13%, whatever you got, because it's going or likely to revisit the bottom, right? As it kind of breaks a key support again, it's probably going to give you the exact same entry. So I think that worked out for a very large number of people. A lot of people like to trade MFT, right? I think all these charts look very good again. Another thing that we've covered is RCN. I know a couple of you guys have traded this like 3 or 4 times now, right? The same way we traded this one in January, right? And it was a nice 30% play. Someone asked on stream, they said, does that play make sense again going into February? And my answer was, and it's going to be the same really for all the coins. I'll go through them individually, but for all the setups that were cycle lows that we've looked at in January, that we've looked at in February, that we've looked at still the last week of February, to me, structurally and technically, as long as a coin is holding its cycle low, right? September 12th low. I have so many scribbles on here. Sorry, guys. As long as it holds that cycle low, technically there's no difference to the trade right now than when I first covered it or when I first liked these, right? The invalidation for all these isn't really a time thing as much as it is, if RCN, and a few of them have done this. Key is a good example. If RCN does drop below these cycle lows or this kind of key support or entry area that I've liked, then it's wrong. Right, so for MFT, looking at it, whoever has the question, MFT, right, if it closes below, same thing as key, right, it's just kind of a really easy decision for me. I'm not saying trading is easy. I'm not saying that anything about this process is easy, but I think having a rule set that makes your decision-making maybe easy, I don't think that's a stretch, right? So the entry for MFT in January when we played it for the, even if you only got 10% like me, some people got a nice 20, 30%. For me, the setup is literally no different, right? We're getting a nice volume spike right along the exact same entry we had back in January. To me, MFT looks fine for that play again, right? And ideally, I'm aiming for 109 sats, right? Or these kind of swing highs up here that I think are worth a targeting for. Maybe 103 sats this time, maybe adjusting a little bit. But for me, that's kind of an easy setup to look at and say, technically, it's the exact same, right? Volume spike kind of breaking out of the nonchalant volume we've had is nice, right? I like fills anywhere in the 75 to 72 range. Now, thinking about where I'd be wrong, that's probably even more important to be thinking about as Bitcoin dumps, right? I'm wrong if we close below cycle lows, right? So for me, MFT isn't any different. Whoever asked about MFT, hopefully that answers your question. Sky Jones, I think a new entry around 75 to 72 makes a lot of sense. My only thing before I go into, because I want to cover like 5 or 6, I know a couple of you guys have asked about Tomo Shub, I got you. My only thought, big picture for all these, and that's probably the most important thing to think about besides just the individual trades, is now that there is kind of I would say there's a greater risk of Bitcoin dumping, right? Who knows if this was just a drop of a couple, people selling a lot of Bitcoin. Who knows if this was a larger sell order and this has actually all been a bull trap. Whatever it is, right? The movement the first time we crossed above 3,700 and we're on our way and I liked alts, last week, it was undeniably bullish for Bitcoin, at least in my own head, right? I thought as we break out above this, that's huge. I think we moved to 4,200. Entering the week this week, even though we're entering the week at the same 3,700, right? And I do like a small movement. That's why I bought. I think it's a stretch to say that I'm as bullish as last week. I think last week, I said it confidently, conviction, we move up. It is hard not to be short-term bullish. I think right now I'm a lot more cautious and definitely more conservative in thinking, this price action here is bullish, right? I would say it's a lot more, I would say there's a lot more risk and probably a lot more likelihood that we either move sideways or move down, right? So what does that mean for all these individual plays? I think that's the one difference now, right? As we moved up to begin February, outright bullish as we're kind of checking these levels off and moving higher. This time, even though we're at the same level, I'm not outright bullish this week. I want that to be clear. I think there's definitely a greater risk that we can drop again, right? So although these setups do look good, MFT and the other ones we've covered that are literally at the same level, right? DNT is another one where all these charts look nearly the same, right? The setup for me is nearly the same. A lot of them are in slight profit or literally sitting in entry. The only difference is when you are playing MFT or if you are playing DNT or if you are playing any of the cycle low setups I've covered, QSP, whatever it is, right? I do think the risk of them failing now is slightly higher, right? So for you, if that means maybe, taking off one or two of the trades or playing them with a smaller size or not entering a new one, today or whatever that means for you, right? I can't give you advice. I want everyone to play it as they see it. But just passing along objectively, if there is a greater risk for Bitcoin to fall and for major alts to not do so well, that probably also translates into the mid-cap, Binance plays. I do think my cycle low framework will limit the losses, right? But I do think the likelihood of some of these getting stopped out or falling below cycle low support is a lot higher, right? That's kind of the one thing I want to make clear as we kind of continue to focus on big picture strategy, right? And how many people that's helped. All right, let's look at Tomo Chain, MPXS for sure. Michael, question really quick on Bitcoin, and then I'll go to the rest of the alts. I see your guys' questions. Luke, can you go over your strategy on how much exposure to margin you have when you go long? Use Bitcoin as an example. If you're long, do 2x, 5x, 10x margin. Michael, my answer to this might be a little bit different than what you see on Twitter and elsewhere. But I really think margin or leverage doesn't matter. And what I mean by that, I'm not telling you to use 100x. I'm not telling you that it doesn't matter what kind of leverage you use. I think it's the leverage you're using shouldn't change your play at all, right? So what I mean by that, a lot of people new to BitMEX or whatever it is will talk about, I'm 25x long from here. Like that doesn't change the play whatsoever. Like adding more leverage shouldn't all of a sudden mean that you start trading 3 times larger. And me being long 2x is no different than me being long 25x. Right? It does change where my liquidation level is, but you shouldn't have a goal of being liquidated anyways or using your liquidation as a stop. So what I mean by that is I use cross. What cross does is, it actually allows you to use your full balance kind of as the margin you're putting down. So it'll calculate it as if it's 100x. But really, I would think more of what's more important is still determining where the stop loss is for the trade and then your position size, and that would kind of account for how much risk you're using. Really, really quick example before I move on. So let's say I have a 10 Bitcoin trading account, right? And you want to trade at 1 Bitcoin size, right? So you want to trade a 1 Bitcoin notional volume trade, right? So you have 10 Bitcoins in your account. You want to buy 1 Bitcoin here, right? So let's say if you had, you're trading with 10% of your account, you have a 10% stop on this play, you're risking 1% of your account, right? So 10% stop, even if that's way down here, right? You're risking 1% of your entire account. You're trading 10% of your account and you're risking 10% of that, 10%, right? So regardless of whether I used 25x on that play and I only put down, 0.04 to open up 1 Bitcoin, or if I use 2x margin on that play and I only put down, 0.5 to open that 1 Bitcoin, that really doesn't change things, right? To me, I think people kind of think about leverage in the wrong way in that sense, in that, it's often like, should I be buying with 10x or should I be buying with 50x, right? It should be really the only correct way I would say to use leverage is to kind of, some people say this, is to reduce your counterparty risk, right? So maybe instead of having a 10 Bitcoin account, right, I understand that I have 10 Bitcoins devoted to that style of trading, but I don't want to have all 10 Bitcoins on that one account for whatever reason. Maybe there's a nasty spike or the exchange goes down, it gets hacked, whatever that is, whatever that counterparty risk is, right? It does allow you to have kind of only 2 Bitcoins on that exchange and then trade 2 Bitcoins of size and manage your risk still accordingly. So I think leverage is thought of in the wrong way in that sense. It really shouldn't matter, I guess, is kind of the point, Michael, of what leverage you're using, because your position size and then whatever percent stop you're using, whether it's a 1% stop, 5% stop, whatever it is, right? Your position size, whether your position is 10% of your account and you have, you know, a 5% stop, right? And that accounts for 0.5% of your total account risk. That should really be kind of the determining factor as opposed to leverage, right? Whatever you're more comfortable with. I know some people like to use 10x. I know some people like to use cross. The one thing to consider with cross is it will allow you to open more positions, right? It's kind of freeing up margin. So then you have to think about, you know, if you're 3x leveraging your entire account on cross, you have to be thinking about kind of your total account and how much leverage you're using there. But that's kind of a whole different topic. But I think that should answer your question. It shouldn't have an effect really at all in your trading. I think a lot of people let it have one, but the leverage used really doesn't matter. I use cross very, very rarely as my total account leverage at all. But if it is, it'd be in the 5 to 10x range, right? And that would be for a very, very short amount of time. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Feel free to ask again if I didn't explain that clearly. MPXS. Shub, let me take a look at Pundi. Pundi's one, I don't think it got above 20 sats. We talked about this one going into February, right? I know a lot of people got hyped about this one as it did nearly 80%, right? Kind of from its capitulation bottom. If we look back at where most alts are trading, just to give a big picture, right? A lot of alts bottomed out in August, September, right? This was a good buy then. This is when everyone on Twitter was talking about it, either in September, either here, right? Because the play was, you know, following that same September 12th or cycle low framework, buying here, targeting swing highs, and if it breaks here, right, probably don't want to be in Pundi, right? So it drops another 50%. To me, everyone on Twitter, at least what I saw, was getting bullish on Pundi around here again. So the exact flip side of the earlier Bitcoin coverage, right? I used a previous resistance at 3,700. I don't know. I got to stop drawing so many lines. I used a previous resistance, right? This time it's the exact opposite. This area, 20 sats, was previous support. Now, as Pundi has moved up, right, obviously it was bearish for the past, you know, December, January. As it moved up, all it did was move into a previous support, turned resistance, right? So for me, personally, sure, Pundi could move up and it could move through. I am only interested in kind of being long Pundi if we start closing back above 20 sats. What that means is we've confirmed above this resistance, same as Bitcoin, you know, at 4120. Sure, it could move higher, or I could literally be buying the top at resistance and ready for it to move down. So for me, I want Pundi above 20 sats. I think it's interesting if we close above 20, 21 sats. Then I think it can run. Then I think my expectancy of winning that trade is a lot higher. I think if I'm buying here, it's kind of a lot closer to a flip or maybe even negative expectancy that it actually moves higher, right? So I want Pundi above 21 sats in order for me to buy it. Past that, I'm not really a buyer, right? I could be totally wrong on that, but that's just a framework that time and time again, I think is going to put me in a better position. That's thoughts on Pundi. Not sure if you had anything specific there. Yeah. Yep. Request is a little bit ugly. I know we were looking back at September 12th lows, and this little trend line it was obeying kind of being a riskier entry or a riskier buy above cycle lows. If I look at request here, Kilgore, right, exact same ideas as every other Binance alt that I think makes sense. There's August, September 12th. Don't need to talk about why that's important. I think everyone gets it. And we look back at, it's actually our December 5th, December 7th cycle low, right? So this area down here has a lot of significance. 486, all-time low support, cycle low support for a few different cycles, but also the most recent one, right? So I think request for me in this support zone, I would say we're a lot closer to support, or this support zone, I'm going to say it cautiously, is attractive, right? Keeping in mind what I said a little bit earlier, I do think there's a risk that Binance and mid-cap plays drop. I think that risk is higher this week, now that my outlook on Bitcoin is notably probably, not as bullish, right? Last week and most of February, clearly bullish. This week, sure, like 3,700 support as a bounce. We're getting a nice bounce. I'm not as bullish, though. I do think there's a greater chance that we drift lower. So although I still like a lot of these Binance plays at cycle lows, right, and Request is right along cycle low support, 486, 480, 490, that's a really good support fill. I think the chances that it could break are a lot higher, right? If I was to play Request or have any thoughts on it, I'd want to be buying as kind of as close to where I'm wrong as possible. So if it does fail, my percentage loss, or however you want to play that, is a lot smaller. And so that's kind of the setup I'd be aiming for, or even something like that. But I'd want to see, I think you could even wait till maybe down here, right? Even if my fills is really kind of being patient. I think for a lot of the Binance plays, as I look at them now, is I want to be really patient. So I'd be interested in Request again at 480 sats, or like the all-time low down here, that wick is September 12th, closer to like 450, right? Obviously, there's a lower chance of getting filled there, but I still think this support down here is interesting. It doesn't mean it has to hold, but if I was a buyer, that's where I'd be buying for that reason. Kilgore, hopefully that makes sense. Jeremiah, all right, let's talk about XRP, guys. I haven't got to hit it as much. So, end of the week or the weekend, this to me was interesting, and I obviously updated it that it wasn't interesting, right? As we drop 1% below, it just wasn't convincing that it was going to hold. Obviously, I and no one else had any idea that it was going to be added to Coinbase. I see people saying that insiders knew. Whether or not they knew, I think that matters a lot less. I'm not saying that insiders should be trading it, but it doesn't really change the play for me and you. XRP, if it does move up on this Coinbase news, so thinking about how Coinbase news has affected other projects, right? Let's look at Basic Attention Token and ZRX, two of the most recent ads, right? And Basic Attention Token was one that we played very, very well back in October, November, right? Initial news or initial moves, I think they had kind of a different set of announcements, and people, they were announcing that BAT was going to be added, right? There was like 3 or 4 announcements, right? So we get in the retest, aim for swing highs, because Coinbase pumps just historically, not even recently, as in 2018, 2019, historically have not led to a coin outperforming over the long term. I know a lot of people think it does. A lot of people think Litecoin got added, that's why Litecoin did so well in 2017. That's just not the case. Litecoin performed middle of the pack versus every other coin, right? I put a chart on Twitter, and no one could even pick Litecoin out of the group when I took the names away, right? So it performed very middle of the pack long term. I don't think a coin being added to Coinbase is as bullish long term as people think. I do think that it's positive that a coin gets added to Coinbase. It means the coin isn't going to go away. It means the brand awareness. It's positive. I just don't think that it's as positive as many people think. Most of the volume nowadays is happening on Binance, and Ripple's already on every other exchange possible, right? So I do think the one different thing for XRP is that the community and momentum and all this plays, I think, a bigger role for XRP. Obviously, there's just such kind of cultish behavior around the coin. I am thinking that this one can actually move. If we look at Basic Attention Token, we look at ZRX, they all moved actually like 20 or 30%, and that puts it right at the daily target or kind of the daily resistance that I think is important for XRP if it moves an equal amount. And it doesn't mean it has to, right? But if it does move the same 15, 20% as every other Coinbase ad, that's really where it would move to. But I don't think that it being added to Coinbase is as major as people think. I don't think it's incredibly bullish. The reason I would like long positioning in a Ripple and why I'm playing a small scalp on it is because I think just the perception is there for people that are supporting Ripple that it is major. Right? And for some reason, Ripple events just get blown out of proportion. It's the same thing with their, Swift conference, or not Swift, whatever their conference is called. Right? People go crazy about that conference, or if Bill Clinton speaks, or if whoever else speaks. I don't know why, but for some reason, it's just the community around Ripple it's always so emotional, so much hype, different things like that, right? So I do think this one could move to 9,300 sats. I think it's very high risk to be buying. So I can't really chart up an entry. It's very, very small time frame stuff, scalpy stuff. But if I was long Ripple, or if you are long Ripple and it can move up, this is the level I'd be targeting, 9,300 sats. Right? Exact same concept as Bitcoin. 4120 was the top of the range. This is the top of the range. This is kind of where we've been trading for now ever since October with Ripple. Obviously, we've moved slightly below and slightly above the range, but for the most part, this level, 6,700 sats, and this level, 9,300 sats, bottom of the range, top of the range. Right, so if Ripple moves up, that's where I'm targeting. Right. Hopefully that makes sense. Last question on Pundi. All right, yeah, let me hear your question. I'm going to try to wrap it up, guys. Try to keep this at 30 minutes. Pundi has been one of my favorite coins for a long, long time. I know a lot of you guys are in Tomo with me. Not Pundi, Tomo. For me, honestly, Shub, it's hard to say that I'd buy more Tomo up here, right? We were talking about it, and I talked about it. It's kind of my favorite coin in December, and September was really the last time I brought it up, pre or post 2018, right? So as I look at Tomo today, right, it's been definitely my best alt performer of the year, but honestly, like this level up here at 12.7 thousand sats, and this level up here, the all-time high, for me, these are profit-taking areas, not areas that I'm looking to add. Right, so I think ads in the 5,000, 6,000 sats are interesting. I think adding up here, I wouldn't do it myself, so I can't really say that. At least my understanding is I don't think it's an attractive buy. Obviously, I can't give you advice, and I don't want to give you advice. But for me, I'm not a buyer of Tomo up here. If anything, I'm a seller of Tomo up here. Right? I am staking, but that's all I got for Tomo. Anyways, that's all I got, guys. I'm going to wrap this up. We covered a ton more in depth with Bitcoin like I wanted to. As it relates to alts, as it relates to majors, should be a good week. I know things are a little bit different this week, but I do still think there's a lot of opportunity. So we'll see how this range plays out. For now, I'm going to obey the range or kind of trade the range as long as it holds. Obviously, below 3,700, I think alts get a lot less interesting, and I think ADA and all those would probably take a pretty nasty dive. I think a lot of the mid caps probably going to have to hold off on those. Even if they're still holding their ground, we break 3,700, right? I don't think I want to be in too many Binance or mid-cap plays. I'd probably be waiting for something to develop, whether Bitcoin goes very low or whether it's just a fake out and move back up, right? I'd probably want to sit back and say, okay, what's my next 2 or 3 week window where I can swing alts? That's how I'm viewing things, guys. As Bitcoin moves up, I like 3,900, 3,880. I think that's an important resistance, even if you're not in a trade. That's something I'd be watching. If we break above 3,900, 4,120 is back on the table. All right, that's what I got, guys. Have a good Monday. Have a good rest of your week. I'll see you guys tomorrow, normal time. I'm out. Peace.